So good morning, everybody. Yeah, we're going to talk about a topic this morning that may be familiar to some of you, but probably not. It's actually funny because this morning I was getting ready to come here, and I was talking to my wife, and we're getting the kids ready and everything. And I said, my wife said, "So what are you presenting today?" And I said, "Well, I'm actually a little nervous because I'm going to be presenting this topic. It's kind of complicated." And to be honest, like I know enough about it to be dangerous, but I don't know if I know like I know it back to front. And I said, and there's going to be like attorneys at the front of the room, and a judge from the DIA is going to be there, senior judge from the DIA. And she said, my wife's an attorney, and she said, "Talk as little as possible." So I thought that was very good advice. Raise your hand if your company uses temps. Okay. Or raise your hand if you were ever a temp yourself. Yeah, me too. Okay, so the usage of temps is something that is very common. I'll throw it out to the group. What percentage of companies in the United States in 2017, what percentage of companies in the U.S. Reported using temporary employees? 90? Okay, that in there, it talks about using staffing agencies, so that's not just temps, that's all staffing. So I'm just talking about temps, because that article says 90% of companies use staffing agencies. So the Department of Labor says that about 50% of companies in the United States use temps or plan to use temps in 2017. Different industries obviously have different percentages. So what percentage do you think of healthcare companies use temps? Yeah, who said 70? Here, I'm going to give you a coin because you were closest. So it's actually about 60%, 65%. Okay. How about manufacturing? What percentage? 50? Guesses? Oh, 20? Higher, 60. I heard 60. There you go, 60%. Okay, so this is an issue, what you just read about is an issue that touches a lot of different industries, it touches a lot of different companies, and it's growing. More companies are using temps every year. So I want you to imagine for a second that you're the HR manager, or you're the CFO, or whoever it is that's responsible for insurance coverage at State Garden. And you have an injured, a temporary employee gets injured, okay? So your first thought is probably, well, I have coverage for this person because what did I get from the temp agency that showed that they had insurance coverage? I got a cert, right? So I'm all set, right? This employee works for the temp agency. They're not my employee. They were injured. So I call the temp agency. I tell them what happened. They report the claim to their insurance carrier. Okay, now I don't know the specifics of what happened with State Garden, but I can imagine that there was a bit of a crisis at State Garden when they got a letter one day from an attorney who said, not only was this a workers' compensation claim, but you're now being sued by this temporary employee for the injury that occurred while they were working at State Garden. Okay? So who here, this is going to be a great question, who here has ever read a workers' compensation policy? Okay. Dana, you've never read a workers' compensation policy? You're an agent. Okay, all right. Okay, so I think 3 hands went up and they were all AIM Mutual people. Okay, so there are actually 2 parts of a workers' compensation policy. There's the workers' compensation coverage, and I'm sorry this is not going to be really clear to the folks in the back, but here you have State Guard, and they have their own workers' compensation policy, okay? And you have the temp agency, and they have their workers' compensation policy. And of course, if you're State Guard and you're thinking, well, I'm covered because I got a cert that said that the temp agency for this particular employee has workers' compensation. But there's a little tricky part of a workers' comp. See, there's a second part of a workers' compensation policy. And the second part of the workers' compensation policy covers employer's liability, or EL. If you get sued, if an employee gets injured, they have a choice of either filing a workers' compensation claim, which in most states, and including Massachusetts, is what they call the sole remedy, okay, for an injury at work, which means that they are giving up their right to sue you in return for getting coverage for when they're injured at work. That's how the workers' compensation system functions. The better question really is, why would an employee give up their right for workers' compensation? Does an employee, if they get injured at work, want to have to sue their employer to get benefits? Do they want that? No, of course they don't, right? They want to be able to get payment for their medical bills. They want to be able to get paid for being out of work, to get their wages. And they want to get that fast, too, right? They don't want to have to get an attorney and then sue their employer and then go through the entire litigation process before they may or may not get any benefits. And that's the whole intent of the workers' compensation system, right? It's to protect the employees because then they can get benefits quickly and relatively easily if they're injured at work. And it also protects the employer from being sued. Okay, but there's still this section of the workers' compensation policy because employees can still sue their employers for injuries that occur at work or anything around an injury that might occur at work. Okay, so it could be loss of consortium or it could be pain and suffering. Those things are not covered by workers' comp, right? Right, Lisa? They're not covered by workers' comp. Pain and suffering is not something you can get reimbursed for from workers' comp. Okay? So the situation that happened here was we had an injured employee, an injured temp employee. Okay? And what they did was this injured employee filed for a claim under the temp agency's workers' compensation policy. Everything's going well, right? That's the way it should work. But what this injured employee also did was they sued State Garden. And State Garden, of course, had coverage because they have their own workers' compensation and EL policy. Okay? The real issue here is that this is a loophole because workers' compensation is supposed to be the sole remedy. This is not a sole remedy. This is a dual remedy. Okay, this is the employee saying, I want coverage here, but I also want to be able to sue them because they were negligent. In this case, he claimed that they were being negligent. I think it had something to do with a machine, or I can't remember exactly what it was. Okay, so we want to try to stop this from occurring. We want to put an X on that. We want to stop this from possibly occurring. Okay, if you're a company that uses temps. And the way that you can do that is also in your packet, there's an endorsement to the policy called the Alternate Employer Endorsement. Okay? What's an endorsement? A rider to the policy. What does it do to the policy? Deb, what does it do to the policy? It changes something in the policy wording. Okay? And what this endorsement does, and please don't read it because you will honestly fall asleep or you'll just be like, what? I don't even understand this language in this thing. Because in insurance, we don't always make things easy to understand. But what that endorsement basically does is it says that we are going to make this employee, an employee of, we're going to name this employee as an employee of the temp agency. Okay? In other words, we're going to add State Garden as an additional insured to the temp agency's policy. And what that does is, it's a little bit of legal mumbo-jumbo, but what it does basically is it says that by doing so, by putting this endorsement on the temp agency's policy and naming State Garden as an alternate employer, we're cutting off the avenue of the employee to sue State Garden because we're saying now that the sole remedy of workers' compensation applies. Does that make sense? So you're just cutting that off and saying this employee can only file for workers' compensation benefits, okay, because now that they're a named insured on this policy, the workers' compensation applies. You can't do both. And the court ruled that you can't do both. You can't sue for EL and you also can't file for a workers' compensation claim. So here's what you need to do. If you're a company that uses temps, okay, you probably have a contract with your temp agency, correct? And in that contract, it probably says that they need to carry their own workers' compensation insurance, right? If you don't, it should. Right, Tom? It should. What you should also put in that contract is that they need to attach the alternate employer endorsement to their workers' compensation policy and name your company as the direct employer. If you don't have that, What can happen is that this loophole remains open, and you could possibly be sued by one of your temp employees for an injury that happens on the job. So the question is, well, I have coverage for that. I have an EL policy, so what do I have to worry about? That's the insurance company's problem, right? It does affect your experience mod. Your experience mod is affected by both workers' compensation and employer's liability claims. Okay? So you don't want that exposure to your business. You don't want that exposure to your enterprise. You want to eliminate that exposure by having the temp agency have workers' comp, first and foremost, and then also they must name you as the alternate employer on the alternate employer endorsement. This does not cost a cent to you or to the temp agency. It's a free endorsement. It's free. It's a free endorsement. Okay, and there's really no reason for the temp agency to resist this. Your agent, your broker is your advocate. So if you have questions about this and you're not sure how to go about doing what you need to do, like Dana said, then your broker should be there to offer you advice on how to handle this, how to close this loophole so that you're covered, so that you have the coverage you need.